Oh, hello and welcome. Live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Thank you for tuning in. You, of course, are watching The Week Ahead. And I'm Liezle Wilson. Let's get into those stories for today. Our news further afield, the UN Refugee Agency says the situation in the Ukraine remains dire. The number of refugees fleeing could potentially grow by the end of the weekend. Closer to home, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases says 26 more people have succumbed to COVID-19 related death in the past 24 to 48-hour reporting cycle. And on the sporting front, Kaizer Chiefs left Orlando Pirates with all 3 points after beating arch-rivals Orlando Pirates 2-1 in a DStv Premiership match in Soweto. All right, those are a look at your headlines. Let's take a look at some of the stories we can look forward to on the week ahead. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says Russia is thwarting evacuation plans by not observing this ceasefire. Let's take a look.
О 11:45 Російська Федерація почала.
The Russian Federation started to shell the town of Volnovaka using heavy artillery. As you know, starting from 9 a.m., we had a preliminary agreement to create 2 humanitarian corridors. I can confirm the fact that Russia violated the agreement, in which the Red Cross was an intermediary. We call on the Russian side to stop shelling, restore ceasefire, and allow columns to move along the humanitarian corridor so that the children, women and elderly people can leave the towns.
Ведуться бої в районі населеного пункту Пологе-Оріхове.
Right, staying with that story, the UN Refugee Agency says the situation in the Ukraine remains dire. They say that the number of refugees fleeing the Ukraine could potentially rise to 1.5 million by the end of the weekend. Now, so has begun to fall at the makeshift refugee hub in Poland as refugees from the Ukraine have flowed in. Poland has accepted nearly 800,000 Ukrainian refugees since the start of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Well, in other news now, perhaps closer to home, the KwaZulu-Natal Social Development Department is rendering psychosocial support to 4 women who were rescued from a human trafficking syndicate in Durban. The women between the ages of 19 and 27 were rescued by the police from a house in Durban North. The victims alleged that they were lured from Johannesburg to Durban with promises of jobs.
It's believed that one of the victims was convinced by an unknown individual to recruit other females for a lucrative job opportunity. The job will require them to work at a call center in Durban. On Monday, the victims allegedly boarded a bus from Johannesburg on a ticket paid for by the alleged employer. Upon arrival in Durban, they claim they were transported to a house where they were told to rest before they were to meet their employer. It was at this alleged meeting that the women claim they were told they were to become sex workers. The victims told the police that there was a time when the alleged boss would even touch them inappropriately. One of the victims managed to discreetly use a phone to get help from outside. The victims were rescued by the police and are currently under the care of social workers.
When we found them, they were very emotional. So we are rendering services in terms of psychosocial support and also trauma containment.
Social Development Department says they are dealing with other similar cases.
We got 2 shelters that are accredited to attend to victims of human trafficking. So, and this information, again, sometimes it becomes very private because we don't want the community to know. And also because of the nature of crime, because human trafficking is a crime. So we don't divulge much of that information, but we do render the necessary services.
A case of human trafficking is being investigated by the Hawks. Bongani Gema, SABC News, Durban.
Right, welcome back. You're watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liezle Wilson. We take a look at what we can expect on the political front. Mzwandile Mbeche, SABC News political editor, joins us for a look on the political front for the week ahead. A very good afternoon to you, Mzwa. Thank you for joining us here on The Week Ahead.
A very good afternoon to you, Liezle, and the viewers.
So it seems like there's going to be a rather interesting week on the political front. Perhaps let's start off with the DA, who obviously, as we know, has tabled a motion of no confidence in President Ramaphosa's cabinet. We heard the leader of the DA, John Steenhuisen, saying that the president's decision to bring in outsiders to help is perhaps an indication that he does not have confidence in his ministers at this point. So perhaps walk us through when this is unfolding and what spanner this is thrown into the works.
Well, we operate in a very interesting political space at the moment, Liezle, in South Africa. And of course, when you refer to the motion of no confidence, in fact, we can look at two. Remember, the ATM actually has brought in the motion of no confidence in the president. They had wanted it to be done in secret, but of course the Speaker has rejected that. And then Parliament then will have the opportunity to discuss those two motions of no confidence. Remember, the one is by ATM, which is specifically directed at the President, and the other is the one that has been proposed by the DA. That one is in the President's cabinet. So clearly, this political space is getting interesting. So we want to see what's going to happen. In fact, perhaps some of the issues that we may look at in terms of their importance. If this, for example, were to pass, remember, it simply needs a simple majority to pass, which is 50 plus. I mean, our parliament has 400 members. You just need 201. So if it were to pass constitutionally, I think this would have some sort of implications for the president. But I think a party like the ATM and even the DA on the other side, when you look at the other motion of no confidence, is they want to know if the president still enjoys the full support of his caucus. So we have seen these motions in the past, and then they've been defeated. So I think that's basically a similar attempt. So it will be very interesting to see what happens. But we know this is a party system in the country. Chances are that the governing party will simply pull together.
All right, Mzwai, as we obviously await to see what unfolds on that front, let's move to another story perhaps that we're also monitoring quite closely. The PAC, perhaps the factions that exist, are now battling it out in court. Again, the issues of leadership still coming to the fore. Walk us through what is currently transpiring on that front too.
It's one story really that is never ending. And sometimes you think it's concluded because the court has pronounced this way, and you simply aren't there yet. It's actually the start of another court battle. So what we're having now, remember, the latest court judgment is that Liezle Wilson is the rightful leader of the party. But Marius Molot has been contesting it since. But of course, in the court, in the judgments that have been happening, so they've been favoring Liezle Wilson. But what the Molot has done, he's decided to take this matter to the Bloemfontein Supreme Appeal to find out what exactly is going to happen in this. Yeah, as I'm saying, this is one story that really seems to have no conclusion whatsoever. From our experience, it doesn't matter who wins. Somehow, the losing section will find a way of challenging it. But it's at the highest court in terms of the criminality. So let's see how it goes. Perhaps if the Supreme Court rules, so the losing section will abide, or who knows, it can even be taken to the Constitutional Court. So we want to hear what sort of arguments will be advanced this week when the court sits.
Absolutely. Again, another story we are monitoring. And perhaps as we also look at the ruling party, the ANC, and, leading up to the National Elective Conference, why the provincial elective conferences are obviously also coming up. We see, in fact, that President Cyril Ramaphosa will be headed to Mpumalanga. Perhaps just on that note, within that province, we saw that the ANC had dissolved the PEC in Mpumalanga and has placed a task team there to oversee the province. Perhaps perhaps until its elective conference. And I mean, it's obviously an important one for the ANC, given that it was so instrumental in catapulting President Ramaphosa into power in Nasrec. So I wonder, in terms of these elective conferences that are happening, perhaps the state of readiness and what we can expect, what dynamics are unfolding there?
Yes, this past weekend or this past week, the NWC suspended the two provincial PECs, the one in the Eastern Cape and the one in Mpumalanga, because their terms had expired. So you'd remember that President Ramaphosa, obviously in his capacity as president of the ANC, was in the Eastern Cape last week, and then tomorrow he'll be in Mpumalanga. Coincidentally, the provinces which their PECs have been suspended. So they've been suspended because their dates have expired. Remember, the PEC is supposed to only have 4 years, but these ones, Mpumalanga, for example, last had a conference in 2015 when the now deputy president was the chairperson then, and of course the Eastern Cape was in 2017. So given that this year is the year where the ANC will hold its elective conference, you obviously first have to start with the lower structures, those that have not done the things the right way. So the provincial PECs, those that haven't said, will have to sit, and province like Mpumalanga, as you've mentioned, so is actually sitting next weekend. So we hope nothing changes there to be able to elect the new leadership. And of course, as you have said correctly, the president of the ANC will be in Mpumalanga to obviously speak to the structures. Yes, they've launched their Latina programs to go back to the structures, revive them, and of course deal with these issues that relate to the party. And this is happening in lieu of what will be happening in December 16, 2022, where the conference will be happening. So it wouldn't make sense to have a national conference when your structures don't have their house in order. So that's the process that the governing party is embarking upon as we speak.
So I thank you very much for your time today. Thank you very much for that look ahead, on the week ahead. Again, Mzwandile Mbeche is SABC News political editor, giving us a look at what we can expect on the political front for the week ahead. Perhaps onto our story, to our interview for the story earlier on. In fact, as we continue to shine a spotlight on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, South Africa's non-governmental organization and disaster relief group Gift of the Givers, in a statement, announced that it will provide humanitarian aid to the Ukraine. Perhaps to unpack this a little bit more, as that is a developing story as well, we're joined by Gift of the Givers founder, Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman. A very good afternoon to you, Dr. Imtiaz, and thank you for joining us here on The Week Ahead.
Good afternoon, Liezle. Thank you very much.
What's the latest regarding your intervention, perhaps in assisting providing food and other necessities for those who, have been affected by the war in the Ukraine? How important was it for Gift of the Givers to get involved?
It was very important for us to get involved, especially when the need is so great and if we can do something about it. And it was more also driven by people calling us. We got the Ukrainian Association of South Africa calling us. We had South Africans calling us who were stuck there, whose children are stuck there. We had South Africans who were in the country itself and their families saying they need assistance. And right now we're actually using a channel like that, where a South African man who's married to a Ukrainian lady is the go-between right now to supply aid, which we started yesterday. The lady stayed over in the country, didn't come back, and she's already working in different areas trying to source food items. We're making the funding available, and as I'm speaking to you right now, we're busy with distribution in various areas inside Ukraine. That's what we call soft aid: food, blankets, baby milk, diapers, sanitary pads. The real challenge is to supply aid to the hospitals where it's life-saving, where people will get, are losing their lives and they're in severe disaster. So that we have made arrangements with the human coordinator, the chief coordinator, one of the chief coordinators for Ukraine. We were in a discussion on Friday night. I don't know any of those people. I was invited to the discussion. There were about 22 people on that discussion from various countries. I got a last-minute notice to be on that invitation, and they all knew each other. I didn't know who they were. And after this, during the session, I realized who they were, the all important roles. And then the chief coordinator called me afterwards after I made my input and said, look, we need assistance. And, this is like something new to us, to get involved in such a large scale. So I sent them a blueprint of what to do. And the focus is on supplying frontline hospitals and what to do in terms of their own security. And the supply lines, of course, we're trying to source things in Ukraine first for the medical part specifically, and of course the food and the other stuff. Secondly, from Europe. And thirdly, we're already in discussion with groups in South Africa who want to make pharmaceutical things available. And we've made arrangements with airlines the moment we have this medical supplies to send across to Poland through the human coordinator into Ukraine.
All right, so Dr. Imtiaz, you've obviously spoken about, given the expertise of Gift of the Givers and the interventions, not only in South Africa, but around the world, the intervention will focus on various aspects. And I just wonder if you can elaborate a little bit further about how it will be broken down into two parts, perhaps expand on how that's going to unfold and how those who want to get involved can get involved. You mentioned that you also, part of the meeting with some of the representatives from Slovakia and Romania and the Ukraine and Croatia. I mean, just to mention a few, are you able to divulge, what sentiments were shared there and perhaps the way forward as well for not only the Ukraine, but, the world at large?
Yeah, no, it's not a secret. Everybody's saying we're getting bombed. It's a straightforward message. We're getting bombed, and what can we do? There's no secret about that. They were discussing, they were facing the reality. They said, look, the bomb is going to get worse. All the countries were involved. They said the bomb is going to get worse. One of the persons on that panel, on the discussion, was a doctor in Kiev, in one of the hospitals where the bombs were falling around. And he was shouting from there and saying, please, close the flights, close the air. They said, close the air, this is the problem. On the ground, they got no chance against us. But on the air, we got no chance. The bombs are killing all of us. We have to put the no-fly zone, and NATO and Europe has failed us. That was the sentiment. The sentiment came out quite clearly again why, the no-fly zone has not been created in the area. Other than that, they said they're doing the best they can, and they all started talking about what lists they have, what each hospital requires, and what needs to get to them as soon as possible. So they were busy, that kind of list, and the human coordinator said, one of the chief coordinators for Ukraine said, look, we've got stuff coming in, and we'll try to get it to as many people as possible. But that's easier said than done. The bombs are falling everywhere, and the corridors are not that easy to open. So you need to get a window where you can get in and supply the items as soon as possible, as fast as possible, and in the largest quantities as possible. So that's going to be the continuous challenge in any war situation. But you sometimes do get that window but there's several things in that window. One is to move out those who are stabilized, to move them out of the front line to hospitals in the back, much further away. Secondly, to move all people who require normal care, primary health care, high blood pressure, diabetes, asthma, whatever they have, they need to be moved to areas away from the front line. You asked me, what are the two parts? The two parts are responding to Ukraine, helping Ukrainians in Ukraine and anybody else in Ukraine, and secondly, helping South Africans from Ukraine who want to come home. But there's two parts of it. Quite a few South Africans are already in Hungary, students, and in Poland. Some of the students don't want to come back. They want to stay in Europe. They think they won't get a chance to study any further. They want to stay there. It's anybody's choice. But those who want to come home, we try our best. And we've got people who want to fund the flights to bring them back to South Africa. So there are arrangements for that. You asked me about the sentiment of the countries around. The sentiment around it's very positive. All the countries that were represented there said, look, the moment the refugees come across, a lot of their own population are coming to meet the refugees to take them to their own homes, to take care of them. They've said they've prepared their own facilities to keep the refugees there, to provide for them. And also they've opened up all their hospitals. And they said they can open up as many beds as possible to take in injured people or ill people.
Dr. Imtiaz Sooliman, thank you very much for joining us here on the week ahead. Dr. Imtiaz Sooliman is the founder of Gift of the Givers. And again, as we monitor the situation unfolding regarding the humanitarian crisis and the impact that the Ukraine-Russia conflict is having on that region, Gift of the Givers, as we heard in a statement, announced that it will be providing humanitarian aid to the Ukraine. Let's take a quick ad break. As we continue to shine a spotlight on human rights, we chat about equality and justice on the other side. This as the month of March builds up towards Human Rights Day. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Right, you're watching The Week Ahead. Let's continue with more news now. We, of course, shine a spotlight on human rights, equality and justice. This is during the month of March as we build up towards Human Rights Day, which is commemorated on the 21st of March 2022 this year. Again, this precedes the launch of the World Bank Inequality Report for Southern Africa, which comes out on the 9th of March on Wednesday. Jimmy Muyaga, independent economic analyst, joins us to discuss a little bit further. Jimmy, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us here today.
Good afternoon, Liezle.
Let's look at South Africa, perhaps taking it back to some of the historical and structural issues that we continue to be faced with. And I wonder, by acknowledging South Africa's peaceful transition from racial domination to democracy, I mean, we can't ignore the fact that there's been a lack of progress towards a more balanced distribution of opportunities and income 27 years into our democracy. And this rightfully, raises questions, difficult questions on the political and economic front. I wonder, in your opinion, what are some of those structural and historic issues underpinning the high levels of inequality pervading society today?
Well, I mean, this is a very difficult topic for South Africa to deal with as a country. But I think if we have to look at the past that South Africa has come from, that's one of the key things that we obviously have to be aware of and cognizant of when we have this conversation. But I also think that we need to be looking at policies and the structures that have been put in place post-democracy and whether or not those structures have achieved the goals that they were set out to achieve, and whether or not we have seen the level of accountability that we should be seeing in terms of achieving the transformation and the changes that we so desperately need.
Well, you speak about, this transformation that's desperately needed. And I wonder, by looking at how power is manifested in structural and institutional, as rather manifested in the form of structural and institutional exclusion and discrimination. How has COVID-19 contributed to the inequalities in the South African society, perhaps even exacerbated the situation?
It definitely has. I mean, there's prime examples that we can look back on just in this COVID period, and we can draw parallels with other countries where we can see there's a vast difference in how the structural setup and makeup of the country at the moment is not conducive to its people and to benefiting its people. I mean, one such example of the structural inefficiencies and deficiencies playing themselves out within South Africa was July unrest, the civil unrest that came about as a result of the unhappiness within the country, and unhappiness that stems from a high unemployment rate, that stems from low job opportunities, that stems from corruption, that stems from the fact that we had received aid that was designed to benefit the people of this country, yet somehow 500 billion rand of finances and funds was looted in a matter of weeks. So that points to the fact that over and above the many systemic problems that we have brought into democracy that came from a colonial past and an apartheid past, the structure that we have in place at the moment really isn't working. And if you want to see the effect that a change in structure can have, and the right kind of changes can have on a government and on a country and on its people, take China as one such example for one. In the last 12 months, their regulatory clampdown has on its own assisted in narrowing their inequality gap and their wealth inequality gap from what they perceived to be a private sector or a 1% elite populace that was way more in terms of earnings than some of their other members of their population. So the policies and the procedures and the structures that we have in place at the moment for this country are not working. They do need to be changed. And by changed, I don't mean we need to simply draw up new policies. There actually need to be new policies that need to be implemented. For the longest time, South Africa's problem has always been we can draft the policy, we can draw up the policy, we can table it before Parliament, but when it comes time to implement the policy, suddenly nobody's there to do that.
Well, Jimmy, this conversation obviously continues, examining these factors that continue to compromise economic inequality in South Africa. We're obviously going to be chatting to you on the back of this report that's set to be released on the 9th of March. Again, Jimmy Moyach is an independent economic analyst joining us perhaps for a precursor of the situation in South Africa. This as we lead up to Human Rights Day on the 21st of March. But again, looking at some of these socio-economic issues that continue to pervade South African society at large. Again, the World Bank Inequality Report for Southern Africa is released on the 9th of March. That's where we leave it for you today. Thank you very much for joining us. That's all from myself and the Week Ahead team. Until next time, do have a pleasant week, and we'll see you next week, Saturday, for Week in Review. For myself, Liezle Wilson, and the team, do take care. Goodbye.